Welcome to Mailbag. Remember, these are comments and questions you guys leave on the channel that we try to answer, or we give them a fair airing. But before we get going, normal parish notices apply. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, why not? If you want to be notified when content like this hits the channel, it's the bell icon. Give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and consider supporting the creation of videos and content on the channel through the Patreon account, which is down there. Also down there are the Facebook and Instagram links. Follow me over there because that's where announcements, shenanigans, and anything else related to the channel gets posted. But now back to the video. Okay, the first one for this section comes from well-known commentator Sean Curran. Hello, Sean. And this is in response to the TRS has low gain with MX-1 R8 is a match to the 707 and 505 video I did at the beginning of August 2020. And he writes, great video, 2 thumbs up for Roland R8 and Octapads. Octapads are fantastic, however, be warned. They are a gateway drug, and before you know it, you'll be strung out with a monster TD-50 kit, triggering racks of samplers and Ropplers, and the R8 Mark II and the R8M are great little instruments. Check out the RM Mark II since it comes with most of the ROM library and onboard drum sequencer like the R8. The R8M is basically the R8 without sequencer, but with 3 more ROM card slots. Also, for those looking for CT drum sounds, you'll need to pick up the electronic and dance ROM cards. That was one of the key things about the R8, is the fact that it was sort of produced around this time where Roland basically issued a bunch of ROM cards that catered for different music genres: jazz, power drums, rock drums, that sort of stuff. But that was all great info, and I think well worthy of a shout out on the channel. I loved my R8 when it arrived. And I was also wrapped to a car on R8, although having said that, I haven't done an awful lot with the R8 so far. It's pretty much sat in the box. I do need to give it a good clean. And it's funny, actually, because I actually went and bought my Mr. Muscles this morning so that I could actually start cleaning some of the stuff that's turned up recently. The next one comes from, and I'm going to get this from Exeter Mura. Okay, I said, guys. In response to Roland MX-1, the USB ports explained video I did back in January 2019. And they write, I enjoyed my MX-1 with all the ARIA series connected, System 8, TR8S, TB3, VT4, but now my studio gets too big for it. 3 more synths, 3 FX, guitar, Akai Force, 2 monitors and 2 PA, 1 sampler, 1 recorder. I was thinking of buying another MX-1 as a slave or a jump to a big mixer that I record, but only a few stereo instances, or to an AD/DA system. Not sure which is best. Interesting question. Firstly, I don't think the MX-1 route is the right route for you. Basically, you cannot plug an MX-1 into another MX-1. You have to plug the MX-1 either directly into your computer, because it wasn't designed to slave an MX-1 to an MX-1. Now, apparently you can do the computer thing, and there is a couple of electronic dance guys who follow the channel who've told me that they've done that. So I've never done it. I'm probably never going to own 2 MX-1s. I think the MX-1 was... the idea was great. It was ill-conceived, though. That's probably the way I put it. But you can slave an MX-1 via audio to each other, but you then use 2 audio channels on your original MX-1 to do that. Not a great idea. However, if you're like me and you have a range of synths, then my advice is get a good mixer. That's pretty much the way I would go here. Good mixer, good patch panel. And then just either take the feeds directly from a mixer. So if you go and get something like if you're big enough and you've got the money, something like a Behringer X32 or Wing, where you can actually hard disk record directly off the mixer, or they will actually supply channels directly into your door on a channel by channel basis. So, you know, something like that probably, given the setup you're going to, is probably where you need to be heading. Or you could do something like I've got here, which is this is the Mackie Pro FX12, but they do a Mackie Pro FX20, which has a number of stereo channels on it and a number of mono channels on it. That might be another way around it. The downside to this will supply audio to your door, but it's pretty dumb in the way it does it. It will supply effectively a stereo feed off the mixer, so you do all your mixing on the mixer and then supply the output. But if you want to record individual channels on your door, your better bet is to go to something that's got a little bit more intelligence, like the sort of two Behringer mixers I just talked about. The next one comes from Kelvin Uhar, I think that's pronounced. In terms of the Korg OASYS installing memory and new battery. And he writes, you can flip the control surface up to get to the battery and memory by removing one screw at the end of each of the OASYS. There's no need to take it off. I think there's 3 screws actually. But you're actually right. I think when I did the video, I was trying to actually get into this thing to work out, and I took the end panels off, which are these 2 silver pieces. But to be honest, the 2 end panels do absolutely nothing. They're just there for pretty much show, and to hold the mesh for the airflow to go across the keyboard. But yeah, what effectively you do is there's 3 screws. There's one that in, there's one that in, there's one in the middle, and then this whole surface comes up, and the memory is all under here. But you're absolutely correct. Good shout out. I think when I was doing the video, I was trying to find out how I did it. Okay. Next one comes from Pellis, 1981. And that's in response to the SMR, you should be upgrading your computer, and Grey Matter DX7. And he or she writes, on the E mod with the DX7, when you load patches via SysX, does the aftertouch info and mod info get imported as well? I had a SIR 7 upgrade on another board and it wouldn't transfer that info via SysX. I'm going to be honest here. I'm going to be really honest and say I haven't had brave enough. I haven't felt brave enough to actually install this Grey Matter board in my DX7. Plus my personal circumstances of moving house and all the other stuff that's gone on recently, just haven't really put me in a place to do it. And I wanted to do it while I was actually making a video as well. So, you know, you've got to sort of have the video set up rather than just getting the keyboard. So a number of things have kind of inspired. So shortly after acquiring the board and making the video, I packed the studio up and moved. So that's the first thing. And the second thing really was I really wanted to acquire a second Mark II DX7. I don't want a Mark I. And a number of people have said, why don't you want a Mark I? And it's personal preference. I think the Mark II is far more functional. You get all of the Mark I, but you get far more functions in the Mark II. So why would I have a Mark I? And then I get some purist who turn around and say, well, you know, that's my personal. So I was kind of looking for another Mark II, and I'd rather have an FD rather than a D. So I've seen a number of Ds come up. I don't want another D. I've got a D. I want an FD. So because I haven't found another one of those, I kind of haven't felt brave enough to get into my original D. Now, I've read a number of user groups about the kind of the upgrades, and one of the things that comes across loudly is that when I do the upgrades, if I'm taking chips out of the board that don't have sockets already installed, I'm going to have to install sockets. So I need to go through that whole process of working that out as well. And it's also much better if you're doing sort of pin jumper arrangements where you have to solder wires to specific pins on specific chips. It's better to be able to do those in chip holders. So there's a number of things I need to sort of get around to figuring out on the e-card and and I'm not sure I'm currently in the space to do it. So it's all sitting in its protective wrapping, anti-static bags and what have you, in storage, and that's kind of where it's going to stay for a while. And the last one, I thought the last one was the last one, but this might be the last one. But then the last one might be the one before last, if that makes any sense. From Tim Stamper, in response to a mailbag on the DX7 hidden patches USB support. TR8 firmware video I did in November 2019. And he writes, got a question. I watched your video about the USB inputs on the MX-1. Great job explaining. Is it okay to power off the MX-1 while the TB3 is connected to the USB power input number 3 on the MX-1 while the TB3 is still switched on with the AC power adapter? The TB3 manual says to power off the MX-1, or is anything else externally connected? First an input, then power off the TB3. I hope you're following this. However, because you power off the MX-1, it powers off the TB3 because the TB3 is connected via USB bus slot. Is this okay? I'm powering the TB3, then the MX-1, and powering off in the reverse order. But the weird thing is the TB3 is already shut off. Thanks. I hope you followed that. Basically, what the tuber is asking is, I've got an MX-1, I've got a TB3. The TB3 is plugged into the USB socket on the MX-1, socket 3, which I think is the powered socket, and basically is saying, is it okay to power off the MX-1 when I haven't first powered off the TB3? I think somebody's just being ultra cautious in the documentation, if I'm honest. But if the TB3 is drawing power from the MX-1, as soon as you switch the MX-1 off, of course, it's going to switch the TB3 off because there's no power being supplied. So that's kind of the sort of the first thing. I think I know why they're saying it, and I think I can try and explain it. If you have a connected device, if you have a device connected through another device and drawing power, when the first device is switched on, then there's a potential power surge to the devices connected to it. So effectively, all of a sudden, you're giving power to everything. And that power surge can be much higher than when it's normally running. So the power you require for running normally is normally lower. But when you fire things up, because capacitors need to charge up, etc., the power can quite often draw more power than it is at a sort of standard running rate. And therefore you can have a surge, what they call a surge. And I think there is concern that USB's power, the MX-1 power circuitry on the USB bus might not be able to handle the surge. So for safety, what they turn around and say is fire up the MX-1 first, then fire up the TB3 second, and you effectively have negated surges on both power boards. The reverse is when you switch something off, things like capacitors tend to discharge, and therefore you get a reverse surge potentially if the circuitry hasn't been nicely and cleanly designed. So what you do is you turn off the TB3 first, that circuitry can discharge, then you turn off the MX-1 and it can then discharge as well. So it's the reverse of the first, if you like, so there's not a discharge coming back down the wire. The likelihood of that happening is pretty slim, but I do suspect with the ARIA equipment, there's probably not an awful lot of tolerance in the power boards. The other side of it as well is if you're syncing from the MX-1 to a slave device, if you don't switch the slave device on after you switch the MX-1 and the clock is initiated, then quite often the slave device doesn't recognize that the MX-1 is there, and therefore the syncing doesn't work properly. So it's always best to switch the slave on second.